with our 60-second writing for today, and this will tie in last week's talk about genetic engineering and selective breeding with this week talking about natural selection and evolution and Charles Darwin. So first of all, let's start out with our do it now question. What is selective breeding? What is selective breeding? You remember from last week? What is selective breeding? Yes. When an organism is born with traits that help it survive. That's actually a little bit more like natural selection, when living things with the best traits survive to reproduce, and that's nature selecting. Whatever environment they're in helps them survive. What about selective breeding? Do you guys remember selective breeding from last week? Yes?
Selective breeding is when you take a plant out a certain trait that you want to breed it.
Okay, excellent. So selective breeding is actually very similar, except humans are actually choosing to breed plants or animals with desired traits to make better plants and animals. So why would we do this? What are some examples of selective breeding that have been done that for various plants and animals? Kate, what's one? Dolly the sheep, and that's actually a little bit different. So that's going to be genetic engineering on a different level. It's not just selective breeding. That's actually taking the genes from one animal and basically you're making a clone in that case. What else? What other animals? Selective breeding is a type of genetic engineering, but it's actually been going on for thousands of years. What's a very simple, this could be very low tech. What's an example of people choosing animals or plants with the best traits and choosing those ones to reproduce? Logan.
You have a dog that is good at smelling or good at something, and you have
Excellent. Yes. So dogs are an awesome example of selective breeding because dogs, when you think about it, the vast variety of species of dogs we have been selectively bred for a number of different things. And Logan's example was breeding a dog that has a really good sense of smell with a dog that can run quickly, so you get both of those good traits. What would be another example of selective breeding, Nathan?
A mule, a mix of a donkey.
Ah, and why would you mix a donkey and a horse to get a mule?
Because like a horse is
Good. So because the donkey is very strong and the horse is faster. And so the mule, which is the hybrid between the two, has some of the traits of both. Excellent. What's another one, Sabian?
snakes. People breed snakes to make them look prettier.
Yes, people breed animals to make them look prettier for pets, like snakes, like any pets. Take your hood off, please. All right, Kyle. Yes, corn. Anything that people plant in the ground to grow for crops, right? You want to plant the seeds that can handle the environment and that produce a lot of food, right? And the first people that probably did that, oh, look, this corn grows really well here. I will save a few of the kernels of the corn that grew really well and was really good food and replant those. So people have been doing that as long as they've been actually planting things on purpose. That's absolutely selective breeding. A couple more quick examples. Marissa. Uh-huh. Okay, so yeah, it gets a little complicated because a horse and a donkey are different species, and usually you can't cross things with different species because they have a different number of chromosomes. So a horse and a donkey are very unique example because the horse, well, first of all, they're obviously very similar, and it just happens to be that the chromosomes match up such that they don't lose any important information. The horse has 64 chromosomes, and the donkey has 62. So when the cells go through meiosis, how many cells is the sperm or egg going to have here? 32. How many is it going to have here? 31. How many chromosomes does a mule have? 63. So mules actually can't reproduce. Mules are sterile. They can't have their own babies because they're missing a chromosome. but it just turns out that there's enough duplication because the animals are very similar. So in this point, it works. Yes. And so a mule is a very interesting example because you're right. This wouldn't be a very good example of selective breeding because once you get the mule, you can't pass those traits on. Okay, so let's go back to this. So we've got dogs, and let's break this down a little bit so we have time to finish the rest of our conversation here. Selective breeding can be broken into two different categories. One is called hybridization, oops, which is all the examples we've talked about so far are actually hybrids. Hang on. I can't spell hybrid today. Hang on. Let me try one more time. Hybridization. Hybrids. And the other one is called inbreeding. Yeah, that would be more like the corn. So if you're looking at hybridizing things, you're breeding two things that are very different to get good traits from both. Inbreeding is the opposite. You're taking living things that are very similar and breeding them with similar ones. So like purebred German Shepherds, purebred Black Labs, that sort of thing. So anyway, so those are the two different types of selective breeding. Now, natural selection is actually when this is happening just in nature. So when living things with the best traits survive to reproduce. And that turns out to be what Charles Darwin was observing when he got to the Galapagos Islands. So let's move on a few minutes here to the next thing, talking about Charles Darwin. Those are the questions you did yesterday. And so let's start right here. These actually are images just cut and pasted from the textbook. So if you want to follow along in the textbook, you can. It starts on page 172 if you want to follow along to see the pictures there. So here we go. Charles Darwin. And this was in about 1831. And, you know, it's kind of interesting, I think, the twist of fate sometimes that leads to great discoveries. But Charles Darwin was a naturalist, which just means he studied nature. This is in 1831, so we didn't really have the label biologist as such. But basically, he had studied theology, he had studied religion, and he had studied science, and his father wanted him to go on studying religion and theology, and he just didn't really know what he wanted to do with his life, so he said, you know what? I don't think I want to study theology. I'm going to go join the crew of this ship and just get the heck out of here. So he was kind of running away from his home here in a way. I mean, he was an adult and everything, but and what was the ship was the HMS Beagle. What was the original purpose? What mission was the Beagle heading out on? To do what? To map out something. To map the coastline of South America. And you can see here, again, these are images from the textbook, but you can see here their journey where they started way up here in England. They go down South America, they go around it, and then loop back around New Zealand, Australia, the tip of Africa, and then back up. And so that was their journey. And so he went aboard as the naturalist. Just as they were mapping, he was taking information about all the different plants and animals he saw. Every place they stopped, he took information. He collected samples and recorded information about everything he saw. Now, one of the other really kind of interesting twists of fate is that his very famous observations, of course, are from the Galapagos Islands, which are here off the coast of South America, very near the equator. They're actually part of the country of Ecuador. And while he was there, one of the reasons he spent so much time on the islands of the Galapagos is that actually he was incredibly seasick. He was very seasick, and he couldn't stand being on the ship, so he spent a lot of time observing and cataloging the plants and animals there. And as you read about yesterday, there were some very interesting animals that he saw here that were similar but different to what he had seen in South America. Questions about that? In terms of what you need to know, just in general, where he was and what he was doing. So animals, what were some of the animals that Charles Darwin observed? Animals or plants he observed? Let's see, somebody new. Somebody new. Connor. Finches. Finches. Finches are little birds. We have finches around here, house finches. They're just little small birds. What else? Different insects, absolutely. Yes. Iguanas. And what else? Tortoises? Yes. What's that? Oh yeah, blue-footed boobies. Anyways, um, so here's a picture of a regular iguana, a common green iguana, much like our iguana in the back here. Uh, so the common green iguana, you know about what size they are. We've got our classroom iguana. They climb trees. They live in rainforesty or deserty, very warm areas. On the Galapagos Islands, he saw these iguanas that clearly, when you look closely, they were iguanas, but they looked so very different. How were these iguanas different than the traditional familiar iguanas? How were they different? Tyler, how were they different? Okay, these ones actually have very large claws, except these guys actually are climbing trees. What do they need the big claws for? They're actually physically much bigger. What do they need the claws for? Because they're hanging on rocks. They're still, they call them Galapagos iguanas. And these ones are called the common green iguana. And what he noticed, guys, what he noticed as he was watching these, they look very different, but they live in very different environments as well. Excuse me? Yeah, our iguana, she's also a common iguana. She's a little bit more orangish than green, but she's basically this kind of iguana. Okay, so how are these marine iguanas different? They're also called marine iguanas. So one obvious difference is what? They're bigger, their color, they're blackish and brownish and reddish. They actually live on the volcanic rocks. They have long claws to hold onto the rocks. These iguanas actually eat seaweed, and they actually dive into the water to eat the seaweed. The Galapagos Islands, if you guys have all seen pictures of Hawaii, the Galapagos Islands are similar in some ways to Hawaii. There are volcanic islands, um, and so similar in terms of formation. Uh, is everything on the Galapagos Islands giant? Not necessarily. They are famous for the giant tortoises. These iguanas are big, but there's not a lot of other natural bigger predators, so that's a good question. Okay, yes, Lily. They're both lizards. Are the bearded dragons, are they carnivores? Okay. So they are both lizards. The bearded dragons are smaller, different environment. The iguanas are fairly big. Okay, so let's move on. The finches. These are pictures of the finches. Just some of the finches he saw. What he noticed about the finches as he traveled from island to island in the Galapagos, the different islands, the finches looked different. And so he saw they had different sized beaks. And when you think about in the Tim and Moby yesterday that we watched, the little video Tim and Moby, what was the adaptation of the bird? The long beak for good for getting insects in the bark of the tree. So he saw some of these had long, skinny beaks. Some of them had big beaks more like a parrot for eating fruit or nuts, and some of them had the traditional beak for seeds. All right. So years later, as he looked through all of the samples he had collected and was slowly cataloging them, he came up with this idea. And he said, you know, these animals really, this iguana looks a lot like the marine iguana. These finches all seem to be very similar, but now they're different. So his idea was that they all came from the same species. So what we're going to look at now, and again, these pictures are cut and pasted from the textbook if you want to follow along, and then otherwise, I have another example here in writing. But he came up with the theory of natural selection, of evolution by natural selection. And so what's happening is because the environment is very challenging, the animals that are best adapted survive. So here are the 4 steps of natural selection. You should write these down. You'll see them on the quiz, the test, and in the activities we'll be doing tomorrow. So step 1 is overproduction. Overproduction. And what that means is that many more are born than can survive. So example, in the spring and summer, thousands of insects, right? Thousands of grasshopper eggs are laid. They're not all going to survive. The textbook shows the example of the turtles. Overproduction. Look, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of eggs, sea turtle eggs, but not all of them are going to survive. But right now, lots and lots of eggs. Think of fish or frogs. All of these animals have way more eggs, way more babies than will live to adulthood. So that's step 1 is overproduction. Step 2 is variation. And variation is that each of the individuals is going to be slightly different due to getting different traits from their parents and from random mutations. Over the past couple weeks, we've been talking about Punnett squares and about passing down genes from parent to offspring, and meiosis, where you get the random selection of traits in the sperm and the egg. And because of that, you get incredible variation in the next generation. So each of the individuals is slightly different from each other. And so, for example, some grasshoppers might be faster, they can jump higher, or they have different colors, or different variations of yellow, brown, green, and orange. For the turtles, each turtle has slightly different traits. Some turtles can move faster. Some have slightly different coloring. Okay, so first we got overproduction, then we got variation. Then the next step, hang on one second here, choice of, okay, so moving on. Shh. Oh gosh, guys, I do nice things for you every single day. I'm recording this lesson, for instance. Okay, step 3. And this is the really important one. So step 3, competition and the struggle to survive. When we think about pets and humans, evolution, natural selection doesn't happen so much to pets and humans because there's not the same struggle to survive. So these turtles, and if you go back, I think most of us have seen pictures or videos of, you've got the turtles, right? As soon as these eggs hatch, what is the first huge struggle to survive that these turtles have? To get to the water, right? So the turtle eggs, once they hatch, they have to make a run for the water. Why do they have to get to the water? Yeah, because they're safer from predators in the water. When we watched the video on Friday about the Galapagos iguanas, the Galapagos iguanas have to go through a very similar struggle to survive. They are most vulnerable when they are young, because the birds, all the other predators can eat them. Exactly, because they're very small. The Galapagos iguanas are quite big when they're mature. The sea turtles are quite big when they're mature. So much more vulnerable to being eaten here. And again, if one is slightly slower, or if one has, something wrong with his flipper leg, he might not make it. So competition, the struggle to survive. The grasshoppers might be eaten by birds, cats, lizards, run over by bicycles, die from disease, not have enough food. I know, there's a lot of things. It's a tough world out there. The turtles, again, they have to make it to the ocean to be safe. Then once they're there, they have to find enough food to survive. For the turtles, probably not for the sea turtles, but turtles around here, yes. Oh, the turtles? Yeah, it could be. There are a lot of man-made things that sometimes mess that up. Guys, hang on one second here. So the struggle to survive, when you look at something like a pet, your dog, your cat, are they struggling to survive? Not so much in the same way. We're feeding them twice a day. We're giving them a home. They're not really worrying about being killed by predators or hunting for food. So, yes, but that's not his only source of food, right? If he doesn't catch enough food, still going to live. All right, and then finally, step 4, selection. Those best adapted survive to reproduce and pass on their traits to the next generation. If you don't survive to reproduce, if you don't pass on your genes, then whatever great traits you have don't get passed on. So that is key there. Selection and reproduction. This picture here is survival and reproduction. Only a few turtles survive long enough to reproduce. And so those with the best camouflage, those that are able to find resources to eat, avoid predators, all of those things are going to pass on the best traits. Yes. 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 That's so natural selection or selective breeding? Probably natural selection. Alligator snapping turtle. They they are seriously scary. They are very large. They have a their beak basically. But yeah, they have incredible camouflage. Yes. Oh, the notes are here too. So here's all 4 of them. The 4 steps. So overproduction, variation, competition, selection. And so that's really the 4 steps of how natural selection is happening. When we talk about evolution, it's evolution by natural selection. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't, giraffes don't get longer necks because they stretch their necks. Um, it's because those are the traits that are most useful to survive. So evolution is going to happen over many generations. And we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. Well, what do you think about that? Will humans evolve? What? Right. So humans, guys, humans, we've taken away a lot of the struggle to survive. Our struggle to survive is a little different, right? Because the turtle, what if the turtle was born and he didn't have very good vision? What would happen to him? The turtle? Right. Exactly. So if the turtle didn't have good vision, he'd probably die. What if the turtle was born with only 3 legs? Probably not going to make it, right? Or if the turtle was, weaker, the runt of the litter. But in human society, we we have enough resources that we generally take care. We live in big groups and we take care of each other. And we have hospitals and we have medicine and we have glasses and we have clothing and houses and shelter. Yeah. Hang on a second. Hey, guys, shh. Let's refocus for just a second. And then I have a table group activity we're going to do next. So humans, for the most part, are not evolving really in the same way. There still are things like immunity to disease, um, different environmental things over time, because we can also look at things like nutrition and good health and things like that. And again, here in the United States, where we have clean water supplies and good access to medical care, and we spray to kill mosquitoes, to kill malaria, and things like that. There are probably fewer pressures than if you live somewhere where you have more of those things. Right. Okay. So the next thing you're going to do, and again, this is all from the textbook, and there's our list. So what I'm going to do, each table group will get one of these pictures of animals randomly, and with your table group, I want you to come up with 3 characteristics or variations that help this living thing survive. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that, and then in the last few minutes, each table group will stand up and tell us, what is this living thing? What environment does it live in? And 3 adaptations that are helping it to survive. And they'll be very similar to the activity we will be doing tomorrow.